I used to believe weddings brought out the best in people, or at the very least, their most polished selves. But standing in the cavernous ballroom at Lakeshore Manor, wrapped in soft winter light and surrounded by 200 impeccably dressed guests, I realized that some moments reveal truth in the harshest possible way. The ballroom shimmered with gold accents and white roses that looked too perfect to be real, and the frozen lake outside the window glowed under the weak December sun. It should have been magical. Instead, the air felt tight around my ribs as I stood alone near the back, clutching my small purse so tightly that the fabric dug into my palm. Vanessa Harlow. My brother Ethan's bride stood near the altar where she would soon repeat vows about love and unity. Her bridesmaids floated around her, all soft silver silk and glossy curls. Even from a distance, she looked like someone carved out of privilege, born knowing she belonged in rooms like this. I had spent the last hour trying to blend into the wallpaper, hoping my navy dress and thrifted heels wouldn't draw too much attention. I could already feel the judgmental glances sliding over me, quiet assessments from strangers who knew nothing about me except that I didn't fit the aesthetic around them. I saw the wedding coordinator clip a small microphone to the front of Vanessa's gown. It was supposed to be muted until the ceremony began. It should have been muted. I was thinking about slipping out to the restroom when Vanessa's voice suddenly cracked through the speakers, loud and crisp as shattering glass. Ethan deserves someone classy in his life, not like Claire. At first I thought I misheard. Conversations faltered, a few heads turned, my pulse stumbled. I mean, she's sweet. Vanessa continued, her tone airy and effortless. But come on, the girl is broke. She still drives a 15-year-old Honda. Laughter erupted from a cluster of groomsmen near the side aisle. Even some guests I had never met chuckled, glancing around as if enjoying harmless gossip. My lungs forgot what to do. Heat surged up my neck, my hands trembled. I had never been so acutely aware of my existence as in that moment, spotlighted without warning, reduced to a punchline in the middle of my own brother's wedding. Vanessa didn't realize the mic was on. She kept talking, rearranging her bouquet as she added casually, "Honestly, I told Ethan not to worry. Nobody expects her to contribute much. Not with her kind of job." Another wave of laughter rippled through the room. Someone muttered "wow" under their breath. Someone else whispered, "Poor thing," though I couldn't tell if they meant sympathy or mockery. It felt like standing naked on stage with nowhere to run. My vision throbbed around the edges, blurring the crystal chandeliers and towering floral arrangements. Every insecurity I had ever tried to bury clawed its way up at once. Then Ethan appeared at my side, moving quickly, eyes wide with panic. He grabbed my elbow and leaned in so close I could smell his expensive cologne. "Claire," he hissed, "please don't react. Don't embarrass us today." Embarrass us. As if I had caused the humiliation. As if I hadn't just been gutted in front of a ballroom full of strangers wearing suits that cost more than my monthly rent. I stared at him, my throat closing. He didn't look angry with Vanessa. He looked angry with me. A sharp, cold ache began spreading through my chest, the kind that comes when something inside you breaks quietly. Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the tension, subtle yet unmistakable. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom groaned open, letting in a slice of frigid outside air. The draft swept through the rows of chairs, rustling programs and brushing against bare shoulders. Conversations ceased entirely. Even the laughter died mid-breath. People turned in perfect unison toward the doorway. A tall man stepped inside. He didn't hesitate, didn't fidget, didn't soften his stride to match the mood. Snowflakes clung to the dark wool of his coat, melting slowly under the warm chandelier light. He walked with the calm certainty of someone accustomed to entering rooms where power shifted the moment he appeared. I felt the shock ripple before anyone spoke. Guests exchanged looks of disbelief. A bridesmaid's jaw went slack. Even Ethan's grip on my arm loosened as he whispered almost to himself, "What is he doing here?" I knew that silhouette. I knew it like a memory I hadn't allowed myself to revisit. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my fingertips. I watched him scan the room with sharp, controlled focus before his gaze landed directly on me. Something in his expression shifted, subtle and unreadable, but enough to make my breath catch painfully. The entire ballroom held still, frozen. Waiting, they saw only a stranger. I knew better. And none of them had any idea that the man walking through those doors was about to stop the entire wedding cold. If you had asked anyone in that ballroom who I was, they would have said I was Ethan Donovan's little sister, the quiet one, the one who never left her small apartment on the east side of town, the one with the old Honda and simple clothes and a job that didn't make sense to people who measured worth by income. But if you had asked the families I stood beside in their darkest hours, they would have told you a different story. They would have said I was the one holding their father's hand when he took his final breath, or the one who sat with their mother at 3 a.m. because she was too afraid to die alone. They would have said I helped their brother reconnect with family before the cancer took him, or that I was the only person who listened when their grandmother whispered that she wasn't ready to go yet. My name is Claire Donovan, and I work as a hospice care coordinator. I don't wear a stethoscope or scrubs. I don't make medical decisions. What I do is quieter, softer, and often overlooked. I help people navigate the final chapter of their lives. I sit with families numb from shock, help them understand treatment options, comfort them, and guide them through the maze of paperwork that no grieving person should ever face alone. It isn't glamorous. It isn't high-paying. It's emotionally brutal. But it is meaningful in a way that cannot be measured by salary, and it is the only work I have ever known that makes me feel like I matter. I didn't choose this career because it was easy. I chose it because of my grandfather. He was a Marine who believed in discipline, respect, and the value of looking someone in the eye when they were in pain. I grew up in his house listening to stories about honor, bravery, and loyalty. Not the kind on battlefields, but the kind shown in everyday moments when no one else is watching. After he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, I became his unofficial caretaker. I watched him weaken inch by inch, but never lose his dignity. He used to tell me dignity has nothing to do with money, Claire. He would say it with such conviction that it became a truth I carried with me everywhere. When he passed, I held his hand until the end. The hospice nurse on duty that night whispered, "He wasn't alone. You gave him peace." Those 5 words carved themselves into me. They guided me straight into this profession, even when everyone else thought I should choose something more practical. My family never understood what I do. They pretended to. They nodded politely when I talked about patients, then quickly changed the subject to someone's engagement, someone's promotion, someone's new house. Always some milestone tied to money, status, or polished achievement. My mother used to say, "It's good that you love your job, dear, but you're so smart. You could do something more stable." Stable in her vocabulary meant lucrative. My father rarely asked about my work at all. He didn't know how to talk about dying or grief or anything that didn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. And Ethan, who once sat beside me during Grandpa's final night and cried into my shoulder, gradually stopped asking altogether. His world changed when he entered corporate consulting. His new circles were filled with country club memberships, networking brunches, and conversations about quarterly bonuses. The more he rose, the more he treated my life like a relic of our childhood. Sometimes he'd smile at me with this mixture of affection and embarrassment, as if he were thinking, "She means well, but she'll never understand." And then he met Vanessa. Wealthy, beautiful, sophisticated Vanessa, whose family practically printed money through real estate and medical holdings. From that point on, every part of me that didn't fit into their world became something he preferred to hide. He never said it outright, but I felt it in the way he introduced me to her friends, the way he steered conversations away from hospice work, the way he winced lightly when I mentioned something about death or grief at family dinners. 1 week before the wedding, he said something I couldn't forget. "Claire, maybe keep your job low-key at the wedding. People won't understand it." I remember blinking at him, stunned. The job that held people's hands through the worst moments of their lives, the job that existed because every human eventually faces death, the job I gave every ounce of myself to. He wanted me to tuck it away like something shameful. But I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded because deep down I knew he wasn't saying it to hurt me. He said it because he no longer saw the value in what I did. To him and to people like Vanessa, my life was small, unimpressive, and quietly inconvenient. They didn't know that the woman they dismissed so easily had weathered more grief, more raw humanity, and more unspoken bravery than most of them ever would. They didn't know that my work had shaped me into someone stronger than they could imagine, but they were about to. Growing up, Ethan was the one person I never questioned. He was 3 years older, faster on a bike, braver in the dark, better at math, and endlessly patient with my fear of thunderstorms. When our parents argued, he would knock on my bedroom door and sit on the floor with me telling stories until the shouting faded. When kids at school teased me for being quiet, he stepped between us and told them to back off. Back then, I believed Ethan would always be my shield, the one person I could count on no matter how chaotic life became. We were a team inseparable in a way only siblings who have weathered the same emotional storms can be. But time reshapes people without asking permission, and adulthood has a way of pulling siblings onto different paths, sometimes into different worlds. Ethan's world began shifting the moment he graduated college and landed his first job at a prestigious consulting firm. At first, he handled his success the same way he handled everything else, casually, humbly, almost shyly. But as the promotions came, as the money grew, as he slipped deeper into circles where wealth acted like oxygen, something inside him hardened. His conversations shifted from memories to metrics, from jokes to opportunities, from people to strategy. I used to call him after difficult days at work, wanting to tell him about patients who moved me or families who broke my heart. But gradually his responses became shorter, distracted, polite, but distant. "That must be hard," Claire, he'd say, but his tone carried no weight, no curiosity. It was the tone you use when you are already halfway out the door. When he met Vanessa at a corporate retreat in Aspen, everything tilted. She came from old money, the kind that glides effortlessly through life with a confidence built on generational cushioning. She was charismatic, intelligent, and stunning in a way that reminded me of champagne, sparkling, expensive, delightful to many, but not necessarily nourishing. Ethan fell hard and fast. At first, I was happy for him. He sounded lighter on the phone, more animated. But then the subtle shifts began. He started canceling our Sunday lunches because Vanessa's parents had invited him to their lake house. He started dressing differently, speaking differently, thinking differently. Every time I brought up work, he steered the conversation towards something safer, something easier for Vanessa's world to digest. And then came the moment I knew things had changed irrevocably. It was a family dinner at my parents' house, a small gathering before the wedding planning ramped up. I was telling a story about one of my hospice patients, careful to keep it light, when Vanessa interrupted with a gentle laugh. "Oh, Claire, that sounds so emotionally exhausting. I don't know how you do it. I could never be around that much sadness." The table fell silent for a beat. I waited for Ethan to say something, anything to soften the sting, but he just took a sip of his wine and said, "Yeah, it's tough. Not supportive, not proud, just indifferent." It was the first time I felt him slipping away from me. A week before the wedding, he said the words that still echo inside my chest like a bruise. "Claire, maybe keep your job low-key at the wedding. People won't understand it." At the time, I wanted to believe he meant well, that he was trying to protect me from judgment. But standing in that ballroom during the Mike incident hearing, Vanessa's voice dripped contempt across the speakers. While Ethan begged me not to cause a scene, I finally understood the truth. I had been avoiding. Ethan wasn't ashamed of my job. He was ashamed of me. And that realization hurt more than anything Vanessa could ever say. The first time I met Vanessa Harlow, I remember thinking she looked like someone who had never once been told no. She moved through the world with the effortless grace of a woman raised on polished hardwood floors, private tutors, and summers spent abroad. The engagement party was held at a vineyard just outside the city, the kind of place where the wine labels didn't list prices because the guests were expected not to care. I arrived a little early, nervous but hopeful. I wanted to make a good impression not for myself but for Ethan. He had asked me to be on my best behavior, which stung, but didn't surprise me anymore. When I walked into the tasting room filled with warm lighting and laughter bouncing off the wooden beams, I saw her immediately. Vanessa stood at the center of a loose circle of guests wearing an ivory jumpsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile was bright, practiced, camera-ready. She looked like she had stepped out of an ad for luxury living. Ethan waved me over and she turned toward me with a smooth, slow blink as if she were adjusting her expression the way a performer prepares for her next line. "Claire," she said warmly, taking my hands in hers. "I've heard so much about you." Her voice was as soft as silk, her expression open and welcoming, but her eyes told a different story. They scanned me quickly from my thrifted floral dress to my scuffed heels, and the warmth dimmed by a fraction. A calculation. A quiet verdict. But she still smiled, and I tried to meet her halfway. "It's nice to finally meet you," I said, hoping my voice didn't betray how out of place I felt. She released my hands and tilted her head. "So, what is it you do again?" The question was innocent enough, but the way she asked it, light, curious, almost sing-song, made it clear she wasn't expecting anything impressive. "I work in hospice care," I said. "I'm a care coordinator." Her smile flickered, not disappearing, just trembling at the edges. "Oh," she said, drawing out the vowel as if tasting something unexpectedly sour. "That must be draining. I could never do something like that." Before I could respond, she turned slightly toward her friend Jenna, who had been sipping a glass of rosé beside her. "Can you imagine being around all that sadness every day?" Jenna wrinkled her nose sympathetically. "Sounds depressing." I felt a prickle along the back of my neck, but forced a polite smile. I'd grown used to people not understanding my work, but something in Vanessa's tone went beyond ignorance. It wasn't discomfort. It was dismissal. She glanced back at me with flawless graciousness. Still, she added, touching my arm lightly, "It's sweet that you do it. The world needs people like that." Sweet. The world needs people like that. A compliment wrapped in polite condescension. I nodded, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. Throughout the evening, similar moments accumulated like grains of sand becoming a dune. At one point, Vanessa introduced me to her parents, who smiled thinly and immediately asked Ethan where he planned to invest next year. During a group conversation, Vanessa remarked, "Some people peak in college, some in their careers. And some just never peak, I guess, before glancing in my direction with a knowing smile." Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun set over the vineyard, I overheard her speaking to her bridesmaids. She thought I was too far away to hear, or maybe she didn't care. "It's sad, really," she said, swirling her wine. "Some people stay stuck in starter jobs forever." The bridesmaids murmured agreement. One of them said, "Well, every family has one." They all laughed. My throat tightened as I slipped outside for air, pretending to take a phone call. That was the night I realized Vanessa wasn't cruel in the way villains are cruel in movies. She was cruel in the subtle, graceful, socially acceptable way that cuts deeper because it looks like kindness from a distance. A silk ribbon hiding a blade. Vanessa didn't need to raise her voice to make me feel small. All she had to do was smile. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Vanessa never attacked me outright. She didn't have to. Her talent was precision. Every slight was small enough to be excused, subtle enough to be denied, but sharp enough to leave a mark. It was the kind of cruelty that hides beneath perfect manners, the kind that people defend by saying, "I'm sure she didn't mean it like that," even as the blade twists. The first cut came with the bridesmaids group chat. I wasn't expecting to be part of it, of course. I wasn't a bridesmaid, but Ethan mentioned they were planning logistics and thought it would be helpful if I stayed updated. When I told Vanessa, she smiled and said she'd add me. She never did. Weeks passed, decisions were made, details finalized. I found out through social media posts and offhand comments, always 3 steps behind everyone else. When I finally asked about it, Vanessa widened her eyes with faux concern. "Oh, Claire, I thought I added you. Must have been a glitch." She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't fix it. She just walked away, leaving me standing with a hollow pit in my chest. The second cut came during the venue walkthrough. The planner handed out seating charts to review. My name wasn't on the Donovan family table or any of the extended family sections. Instead, I was listed at table 14, tucked behind a pillar near the service entrance. I stared at it for nearly a full minute before speaking. "I think there's been a mistake," I said gently. "I should be with Ethan's family." The planner glanced at Vanessa, who tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and replied, "We thought it would be more comfortable for you at the overflow table. It's quieter, less pressure, less pressure." The words landed with a thud. I swallowed hard, reminding myself not to make a scene, not to give her more ammunition. When I mentioned it to Ethan later, he sighed and said, "Claire, it's just seating. Don't take everything personally. Just seating." Another cut. At the bridal shower, hosted at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, Vanessa introduced each woman with a glowing description. "This is Jenna, she's in dermatology. This is Megan, her family owns Harlow Medical. This is Kinsey, she's starting her own fitness brand." Then she gestured to me with a small flick of her wrist. "And this is Claire, Ethan's sister. She works in, hospice support." The pause was deliberate, a carefully placed spotlight on the word she didn't respect. Conversation stalled, and several women offered polite, strained smiles before redirecting back to topics they actually valued: real estate, travel, business ventures. The longest cut came at the rehearsal dinner. I arrived early, wanting to avoid the embarrassment of being the last one through the door. When I walked in, the room shimmered with candlelight linen napkins folded like origami wine glasses already polished and waiting. Vanessa approached me wearing a champagne-colored cocktail dress, her lips curled in a smile that never reached her eyes. "Claire, you made it," she said, then let her gaze drift down my outfit. "Cute dress. We weren't sure you'd afford the dress code tonight." A few people nearby glanced over. I felt the flush rise up my neck, hot and humiliating. "I followed the invitation," I replied softly. It said, semi-formal. "Of course," she said sweetly. "And you did your best. That's what matters." She patted my arm like I was a child who had tried hard but failed anyway. Throughout dinner, I tried to blend in, tried to focus on my plate, but the comments kept coming. "Maybe pick something more upscale for the wedding day photos, Claire. The camera can be unforgiving. Are you comfortable ordering wine? They have a complex menu. If not, I can choose something simple for you. Your job must be hard. I mean death all day. I don't know how people stay in careers like that without getting stuck." Each remark was small. Each remark could be dismissed. And each remark landed exactly where she wanted it to. I watched Ethan through all of it. He didn't laugh, but he didn't intervene either. He just kept giving me that strained, silent look that begged me not to create waves, not to embarrass him in front of her friends and her wealthy family. That was the moment I truly understood my place in Vanessa's world. Not a sister-in-law, not a friend, not even a person, just a placeholder. A quiet inconvenience that needed to be managed. But the worst cut of all came when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air, and as I rounded the corner, Vanessa's voice drifted toward me. She was speaking to her mother. "I told Ethan after we get married we need to set boundaries with his sister. She's sweet, but she drags down the image. People notice these things." Her mother hummed in agreement. "It's unfortunate, but yes, appearances matter." I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, my throat tightening as their voices faded. It wasn't just the insult, it was the confirmation. Vanessa didn't dislike me. She considered me disposable. And Ethan, willingly or not, had let her. 1,000 small cuts had done what one deep wound never could. They hollowed me out from the inside. And by the time the wedding day arrived, I was already bleeding invisibly. The morning of the wedding felt like stepping into a perfectly choreographed dream, one designed for everyone except me. Lakeshore Manor shimmered under a pale winter sun, the lake outside still frozen enough to look like glass. Snow dusted the iron railings and the stone steps leading into the ballroom, making the entire estate look like something pulled out of a magazine spread. Inside, everything smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. The violinists rehearsed softly on stage. The florists moved with hushed efficiency, adjusting towering arrangements of white hydrangeas and orchids. Guests floated through the space in designer coats and perfectly tailored suits, their laughter bright and easy, untouched by the quiet panic twisting in my stomach. I stood near the window, watching people arrive, hoping that if I kept my back to the room, no one would notice me. I had spent hours getting ready not to impress, but to survive. I chose a simple navy dress, the only semi-formal thing I owned that didn't make me feel like an imposter. I curled my hair, did my makeup as naturally as I could, and reminded myself over and over that today wasn't about me. That was my mantra. Just don't make it about you. Be small, be quiet, be invisible. It almost worked until I saw Ethan across the room. He was laughing with Vanessa's father, looking confident and polished in a tailored tuxedo. For a fleeting moment, I saw the big brother I used to know, the boy who stood up for me on the schoolyard, who protected me from thunderstorms, who brought me hot chocolate after my first heartbreak. But the image shattered as soon as his eyes found mine. His smile faltered, and in its place came that familiar tension, like he was bracing himself for something he hoped I wouldn't do. He offered a small wave, but it wasn't warm. It was a reminder. Don't cause trouble. Don't stand out. Don't ask for more than this. I nodded more out of habit than agreement. The ceremony rehearsal began, and I took my place near the back, watching as Vanessa fluttered through the space in her robe, surrounded by bridesmaids who treated her like royalty. She radiated the kind of beauty that made everyone else fade into the background. Every gesture she made seemed intentional, delicate, rehearsed for effect. While the wedding coordinator fussed with the sound system, Vanessa practiced speaking into the microphone. Her voice echoed through the ballroom as she delivered her short welcome message. "We are so grateful you're all here to celebrate love," she said sweetly. "Today is about family unity and new beginnings." I nearly laughed. If only the microphone had been working properly earlier that morning, everyone could have heard how she truly felt about family, especially the inconvenient parts of it. As guests continued arriving, I kept my head down. I found my assigned seat again on the diagram table 14, far from the Donovans and even farther from where anyone could mistake me for someone important. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd survived worse things than a seating chart. But as the ballroom filled and the ceremony time approached, an unease settled into me. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I felt the tension like static in the air. A bridesmaid brushed past me, whispering to another, "Make sure Vanessa's mic is ready. She wants everything perfect, perfect." That word echoed in my mind. Everything about this day was perfect, flawlessly curated, obsessively planned. But beneath the beauty, I could feel the rot, the judgment, the cruelty disguised as etiquette, the indifference of people who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. I reminded myself to breathe. Just be still, I thought. Just get through this. When the coordinator finally announced that it was time for guests to be seated, the room shifted. Voices hushed. The musicians began playing softly. Chairs scraped gently against the floor as everyone found their places. Vanessa stepped out from behind a floral archway in her wedding gown, looking breathtaking enough to silence the room. People gasped. A few even clapped quietly, and for a moment, even I felt the pull of it, the beauty, the fairy tale illusion, the promise of something sacred. Then everything ruptured. I didn't see the microphone switch on. I didn't see Vanessa adjust her veil or lean toward her maid of honor. I didn't see the exact moment the disaster began. I only heard her voice ring out far too loud, slicing through the ballroom like a blade. The comment she never meant for anyone to hear. The laughter that followed. The punch of humiliation so sharp I couldn't breathe. And Ethan's whisper, pleading and disappointed. "Claire, please don't react. Don't embarrass us." That was the moment the beauty dissolved. That was when I understood that rot had reached the core. And somewhere deep inside me, something began to crack open. I didn't remember walking out of the ballroom. One moment I was standing under the crushing weight of 200 pairs of eyes, and the next I was pushing through a side door, escaping into a dimly lit hallway that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears, a tight, painful drum that made everything else feel distant and out of focus. I leaned against the wall, fighting the urge to slide to the ground. I just needed air, space, something that didn't feel like ridicule pressing against my skin. I didn't cry, not yet. The humiliation felt too raw, too bright, like a burn that hasn't blistered. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady my breathing, when footsteps echoed behind me. Ethan! I didn't need to see him to know. He had always walked quickly, each step full of purpose, even when he didn't know where he was going. "Claire," he said as he approached, his voice low but sharp around the edges. What the hell was that about? I stared at him, stunned. What that was about? My voice came out thin, shaky. She insulted me in front of an entire room of people, Ethan. She humiliated me. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. She didn't know the mic was on. So that makes it fine. No, he snapped, then glanced around as if terrified someone might overhear us. But reacting would have made it worse. I didn't react, I said quietly. He shook his head. You walked out. What did you expect me to do? Stand there and smile while people laughed at me? He reached out and touched my arm lightly. His gesture neither comforting nor affectionate, more like containment. Claire, please, for once, try to understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture, I repeated slowly, tasting the bitterness rising in my throat. Enlighten me. This day is important, he said. For Vanessa, for her family. They have a lot of connections here, people who could really help my career. I can't afford any drama. Not today. I felt as if someone had pressed a hand to my chest and pushed hard. Drama, I echoed. You think what happened is my fault? I didn't say that. He said quickly, but the hesitation in his eyes betrayed him. But you know how sensitive all this is. Vanessa's family, they notice things. They pay attention to how people behave. It's not just about money, Claire. It's reputation, presentation. I laughed, then a soft, broken sound. So your reputation is more important than me. Don't twist my words, he muttered. I'm not twisting anything I said. I'm repeating what you just told me. He paced a few steps the polished wood floor, muffling the sound of his shoes. Look, Vanessa was out of line. I'll talk to her. After the ceremony. But right now I need you to pull yourself together. Don't give anyone a reason to judge you. They already judged me, Ethan. My voice cracked at the edges. Before I even said a word. He stopped pacing. His expression softened for a moment. Regret, worry, maybe guilt, but only for a moment. Then it hardened again. Claire, please. This is my wedding day. That sentence hit harder than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown at me. My wedding day. Not ours, not our family's. His. And in his eyes, I was a liability he needed to manage. If Grandpa were here, I said quietly, you know what he'd say. Ethan looked away. This has nothing to do with Grandpa. It has everything to do with him, with dignity, with respect. Not the same thing, he said, jaw tightening. Times are different now. No, I whispered. You're different now. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't argue. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Behind the walls, I could hear the muffled voices of guests, still buzzing with gossip, still repeating the humiliating moment that now defined me in their eyes. My humiliation, her cruelty, his silence. Ethan, I said softly, do you really believe that what happened reflects badly on you? He hesitated. Too long. I believe he finally said that it could have been handled more quietly. Something inside me cracked. Not like breaking glass, more like a small, tired surrender. So I should have stayed, I murmured. Let everyone laugh at me. Let Vanessa call me broke and pathetic, and just smile. Claire, he said, stepping closer, do not make a scene. I'm not making a scene, I said, stepping back. I'm making a choice. His eyes narrowed slightly, confusion and frustration warring on his face. What choice? The choice to stop pretending. I said. To stop acting like everything's fine, like you still care about me the way you used to. I do care, he said. Then, prove it, I whispered. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend me. And in that paralyzed silence, I felt the truth settle like a heavy stone in my stomach. He wasn't going to prove anything. Not today. Maybe not ever. A hollow ache spread through my chest as I stepped away from him. He didn't follow. Instead, he stood there torn between the sister he once protected and the life he now wanted more. And in that quiet corridor, lit only by a flickering sconce and the distant echo of music preparing to play again, I realized something painful and irreversible. I had lost my brother long before Vanessa ever humiliated me. Today just made it impossible to ignore. I walked out of the hallway and into the cold air behind Lakeshore Manor, my breath forming small clouds as it left my body. The contrast between the freezing wind and the suffocating heat inside the ballroom felt almost violent. I wasn't sure which one hurt more. Snow dusted the stone patio, crunching quietly under my heels as I stepped toward the railing that overlooked the frozen lake. The scene was beautiful, still glassy, untouched, so different from the chaos unraveling inside me. I gripped the cold iron railing and closed my eyes. For the first time since the microphone incident, I felt the tears press forward, threatening to escape, but I swallowed them back. I had cried enough for people who wouldn't care for a brother who had asked me to be invisible for a woman who managed to belittle me without raising her voice. I refused to cry for them anymore. I was still fighting for breath when my phone buzzed in my hand. At first, I ignored it, expecting another logistics message from the planner, or perhaps a text from Ethan telling me to return before anyone noticed I was gone. But then the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Adrian Hale. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. My gloved thumb hovered over the screen before I forced myself to tap the message open. Claire, I'm in town for a medical conference. Your message last month, you said things were getting hard. I'm nearby. If you need anything, I'm here. My chest tightened. I had forgotten I'd even sent that message. It had been a moment of weakness a night when I felt unbearably overwhelmed by work, by loneliness, by watching families fall apart, while I held their hands together as long as I could. I had typed a message I never intended to send, one that said, "I don't know how much more I can carry alone." Then I must have accidentally hit send. Adrian responded gently, asking if I was okay, but I never replied. I told myself it was too embarrassing, too revealing. And yet, here he was reaching out again months later because he remembered, because he cared. I clutched the phone, reading the message twice more, letting the warmth of it thaw something inside me. Adrian and I had met a year earlier at the National Hospice and Palliative Care Summit. He had been a keynote speaker presenting on patient-centered medical technologies. I had been just another attendee in a faded navy blouse with a notebook full of questions. He talked about dignity in healthcare, how technology should never replace humanity. After the session, I walked up to him nervous but drawn by something I couldn't name. I told him he was the first person I'd ever heard speak about end-of-life care without flinching. He looked at me with quiet interest and said, "That's because I've seen what happens when dignity is ignored." We talked for almost an hour. He asked about my patients, my job, my grandfather. He listened not politely, not impatiently, but fully, like everything I said mattered. When we parted, he handed me his card and said, "If you ever need support, not professional, just human, reach out." I never expected to hear from him again. But every few months, one of us would send a message. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic, just simple check-ins. Two people on different paths who somehow understood each other. And now, he was here, in the same city. Today of all days. I typed a shaky reply. "Adrian, I don't know what to say. I'm at my brother's wedding and it's a disaster." His response came almost instantly. "Tell me where you are." I hesitated, glancing back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Should I involve him? Should I pull him into this mess? Before I could talk myself out of it, another message appeared. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to explain. Just don't be alone right now." Something inside me cracked, not with pain, but with relief. I typed the name of the venue and hit send before I could reconsider. He wrote back 3 words. "I'm on my way." I stared at the screen, my breath hitching. The idea of Adrian walking into the whirlwind of family politics and quiet cruelty felt surreal. He didn't belong anywhere near Vanessa's world. He was too grounded, too thoughtful, too genuinely human. But he was coming anyway. A gust of wind swept across the patio, pushing my hair back, reminding me how cold it was. I tucked my phone into my coat and stepped inside, slipping back through the side door as quietly as I'd left. The noise of the reception hit me immediately, laughter, chatter, glasses clinking. No one noticed my return. I was just one more shadow among polished people. But then the atmosphere shifted. Subtle at first, then sharp. Conversations softened. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the room. The double doors at the back of the ballroom opened slowly. I felt my heart climb into my throat. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew. Adrian had arrived, and the world inside that ballroom was about to tilt in a way none of them were prepared for. When the double doors swung open, the ballroom fell into a silence so sudden it felt physical, as if the air itself had tightened. I didn't turn around at first. I couldn't. My heart was already beating too fast, trembling in a strange rhythm between fear and something I didn't dare name. But the looks on people's faces made it impossible to delay. One bridesmaid's mouth hung open. A groomsman straightened in his seat. Even the violinists faltered their bows, pausing mid-air. Slowly, I turned, and there he was. Adrian Hale stepped across the threshold like he belonged in that room more than anyone else. Not arrogant, not loud, just undeniably present. Snow still clung to the shoulders of his charcoal coat, melting in soft droplets against the wool. He shrugged it off with a single fluid motion, handing it to a stunned attendant who didn't even ask his name. He wore a dark tailored suit that fit him with quiet precision. Nothing flashy, but somehow far more commanding than the expensive tuxedos scattered around the room. The kind of presence that didn't ask for attention, it pulled it. He scanned the room briefly, his gaze passing over chandeliers, guests, floral towers, then landing directly on me. And the moment his eyes found mine, something inside me steadied. Not because he was here to save me, he wasn't that kind of man, but because he saw me. In a room full of people who preferred I fade into the wallpaper, he saw me. Adrian walked forward, the heels of his shoes tapping against the polished floor in an unhurried rhythm. Every step he took drew more eyes, more whispers. Someone near the front gasped softly. Vanessa straightened instinctively, shoulders tugging back, eyes brightening with the kind of greed subtle enough to hide behind a smile. I could almost hear her thoughts. Who is he? And is he important enough to know? Ethan turned too, his confusion shifting into alarm. "Claire," he hissed under his breath. "Why is Adrian Hale here?" But I didn't answer. Honestly, I didn't know how. Or maybe I didn't owe him an explanation. Adrian reached me without hesitation. He didn't stop at a polite distance. He stepped close enough that the warmth of his presence pushed back the cold that had been sitting in my bones since the microphone incident. "Claire," he said softly, the edges of his voice gentler than I remembered. "I'm sorry it took me so long." The words were simple, but they felt like a lifeline. Conversations resumed in hushed bursts. A woman behind me whispered, "Is that—" Another replied, breathless, "Yes, it's really him." Vanessa glided toward us, smiling like a queen who had just spotted new territory to conquer. "Welcome," she said brightly. "I'm Vanessa the bride." Adrian didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on me. "I heard what was said about you," he said, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear, but quiet enough that it wasn't a performance. And I wasn't going to let it stand. My throat tightened. Vanessa's smile flickered. She tried again. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Adrian said, turning his gaze toward her at last. "There was no misunderstanding." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You could hear the authority in it, the calm certainty that comes from a man used to being listened to. Humiliating someone in public isn't a misunderstanding. It's cruelty. And cruelty isn't a joke. Vanessa froze, her smile collapsing in real time. Her bridesmaids stared, visibly rattled. Ethan stepped forward quickly, placing himself between us as if he could shield his fiancée from the consequences of her own actions. "Adrian," he said, lowering his voice, "this is a private family moment. You don't understand what's happening." "I understand exactly what's happening," Adrian cut in. "I listened to the entire room laugh at your sister. I watched you do nothing to defend her." Ethan's face flushed an angry red. "You don't get to come in here and judge." "I'm not judging," Adrian said calmly. "I'm observing." His eyes locked onto Ethan, unblinking. "And what I see is a woman who deserved respect and received ridicule. What I see is a brother who chose silence." A ripple of shock moved through the room. People leaned closer. Someone near the back murmured, "Oh my God." Vanessa tried to recover, tucking hair behind her ear. "We were joking," she said lightly. "It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. Claire knows that." "I don't," I said quietly. The room shifted again, this time toward me. Adrian nodded once, supporting without overshadowing. "There's a difference," he said to Vanessa, between a joke and a weapon disguised as one. Vanessa looked around, desperately searching for allies, but even her parents stared at Adrian with thinly veiled awe and fear. A tech billionaire walking into your wedding was one thing. Calling out your daughter publicly was another entirely. Claire didn't deserve that, Adrian continued. "Not today. Not ever." The room fell into absolute stillness. People held their breath as if waiting for the verdict in a trial none of them realized they were attending. Vanessa stepped back, her eyes glossy with embarrassment and anger she didn't dare show. Ethan finally exhaled and said, voice barely audible, "Adrian, please, this isn't the time." "It became the time," Adrian replied, "the moment your sister was mocked for a life spent caring for others." A hush swept over the ballroom. Then someone began to clap. It started softly like a spark, then grew louder as others joined. The applause wasn't polite. It wasn't hesitant. It rose with conviction building until even the chandeliers seemed to shake with it. Vanessa's face went white. Ethan looked stunned, blindsided by the very room he'd hoped to impress. And me, I stood there feeling the sound wash over me, not as validation, but as release. For the first time that day, I could breathe. Adrian didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply turned to me and said, "You didn't deserve any of that. And you're not alone." And in that moment, the wedding wasn't just stopped. It was transformed. In the stunned quiet that followed Adrian's words, the wedding began to unravel, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the slow, steady way a perfect structure collapses once the first fracture is exposed. Vanessa's smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a tightness around her mouth that betrayed just how deeply she felt the shift in the room. Her bridesmaids stood frozen, uncertain whether to comfort her or distance themselves. Even the guests who had eagerly laughed at my expense earlier now looked uneasy, whispering nervously into their champagne glasses. Reputation was a fragile currency in their world, and it was clear Vanessa's had begun to devalue by the second. Her father stepped forward, clearing his throat, trying to salvage dignity. "Mr. Hale," he said, voice strained, "this is a private event. Perhaps we can discuss this elsewhere." Adrian didn't raise his voice. "There's nothing to discuss." The calmness of that sentence hit harder than any outburst could have. Vanessa's father hesitated, then retreated a step, not physically intimidated, but socially outmatched. Eyes followed Adrian with the wariness reserved for someone who could change the trajectory of your life with a single decision. And in many cases he could. The guests knew it. The vendors knew it. Vanessa certainly knew it. I saw it in the way her throat bobbed when she swallowed. The wedding planner whispered urgently into a headset, trying to regain some semblance of control over the ceremony. But the damage was already done. Attention was no longer on the altar or the vows or the expensive flowers. It was on the truth that had finally been spoken aloud in a room built on pretense. Ethan approached me, his face pale and eyes glassy. "Claire," he murmured, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far." But he wasn't apologizing for his silence or Vanessa's cruelty. He was apologizing for the fallout, for the loss of image, for the whispers now circling the reception like sharks tasting blood. "This isn't about you anymore," he added helplessly, and that was when I understood he still didn't see me. He saw consequences, not wounds. He saw embarrassment, not betrayal. "Ethan," I said softly, "it was never about me for you." His lips parted as if he had something to defend himself with, but then he closed them, unable to form a lie convincing enough to speak aloud. While Vanessa's family scrambled to recover their reputation, the first real blow landed in a way no one expected. One of the investors from Harlow Medical, a man who had approached Adrian earlier with admiration, stepped up beside him. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I didn't realize you were connected to Claire." "My apologies for, well, everything." His tone alone made Vanessa recoil. Vanessa's father stiffened. The investor continued, "We should talk soon, about future collaborations." Adrian nodded politely, but then glanced back at me before saying, "I'll consider it, but I don't partner with people who excuse cruelty." The air thinned. The investor's face fell. "Of course," he stammered. "Understood." He walked away visibly shaken. It didn't take long for the rest of the room to understand what that meant. Vanessa's family relied heavily on high-profile partnerships. Losing one, especially one connected to someone like Adrian Hale, was more than a social embarrassment. It was a financial wound, and this one had been delivered publicly. Vanessa's mother touched her arm gently, whispering something frantic. Her father walked away in stiff, clipped steps, already dialing someone on his phone. Meanwhile, I stood beside Adrian watching the consequences unfold, not because he punished them, but because people revealed who they were when their cruelty mattered. "They did this to themselves," Adrian murmured to me as if reading my mind. And for the first time all day, I believed him. The ballroom felt different after everything cracked open. The chandeliers still glowed with their warm amber light. The flowers still arched in elegant symmetry. The musicians still hovered near their instruments, but something essential had shifted. It was as if the entire room had taken a collective breath and finally exhaled the truth it had been holding back. I stood beside Adrian, steady for the first time that day, and looked at the faces around me. Faces that hours ago held thinly veiled dismissal, polite condescension, or outright amusement at my expense. Now those same faces avoided my eyes, not out of shame exactly, but because they no longer knew what to make of me. A woman they had deemed insignificant had just become someone inconvenient to underestimate, and somehow that felt like freedom. Ethan approached me again, his shoulders slumped, his tie slightly crooked-eyed. The polished version of him had cracked, revealing the boy I'd grown up with, but also the man who'd allowed this to happen. "Claire," he said quietly, "can we talk outside?" His voice held urgency, maybe even regret, but not enough of either. I shook my head. "Anything you need to say, you can say here." His jaw tensed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Ethan," I said softly, "I'm done making anything easier for you." Some guests pretended not to listen, but their stillness betrayed them. Even Vanessa's bridesmaids leaned subtly closer. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't defend Vanessa. I didn't defend you. And I know that looks terrible, but you have to understand how much pressure I've been under with her family, with the expectations." "Pressure isn't an excuse for disrespect," I interrupted. "You were my brother long before you were a groom, and you chose silence." He swallowed, eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I replied, "because you were more afraid of losing face than losing me." He looked down, ashamed but not transformed, and that distinction mattered. "I'll talk to Vanessa," he said. "We'll make this right." "No," I said gently, and the word surprised even me with how calm it sounded. "You don't get to fix this with one conversation. Respect isn't a switch you flip. It's a choice you make every time someone needs you to show up." I could see the moment he realized I meant what I said, that I wasn't stepping back into the familiar pattern where I forgave him because he was family. "Claire," he whispered, "please don't walk away from me." "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm stepping back. And I'm choosing myself this time." He opened his mouth, but no words came. I let the silence sit between us, not cruelly, but with a sense of finality that had been building for years. When he finally nodded, it wasn't agreement, it was acceptance. A quiet acknowledgement that he had pushed one boundary too many. I turned away gently, and my eyes met Adrian's. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't triumphant. He was simply present, offering steady understanding without reaching to claim any credit for what I'd just done. "You didn't need me to expose them," he said softly. "They exposed themselves." I breathed in slowly, letting the warmth of his words settle. "Thank you for standing beside me." "Any decent person would," he replied. "The fact that you've been surrounded by people who didn't doesn't mean you deserved them." Something in my chest loosened. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the tall windows, catching the light like tiny sparks. Inside, my world didn't feel collapsed, it felt cleared. Not empty, but open, a space finally free of expectations I never agreed to carry. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. If you've stayed with me this far, then maybe something in my story echoes something in yours. Maybe you too have stood in a room full of people who smiled with perfect etiquette while quietly tearing you apart. Maybe you've been dismissed because your job didn't shine on paper, or because you didn't come wrapped in the kind of wealth or polish others worship. Maybe someone you loved, someone you trusted chose convenience over courage, silence over loyalty, image over truth. If any of that feels familiar, then hear me when I say this: your worth has never depended on their vision. It has only ever depended on your own. For years, I thought staying small was the safest way to exist. I thought holding my breath and stepping lightly would earn me peace. I thought if I didn't upset anyone, I wouldn't lose anyone. I was wrong. Silence didn't protect me. It erased me. Deference didn't preserve relationships. It starved them. And being humble didn't make people treat me kindly. It simply made me easier to overlook. That wedding taught me something I should have learned long ago. Boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They are doors that only open for those who deserve to enter. You can love someone deeply and still step back when they forget how to treat you with dignity. You can choose compassion without sacrificing your self-worth. You can be gentle without being invisible. And you can walk out of a room, even a room filled with family, if staying means abandoning yourself. Maybe you've had your own Vanessa, someone who cloaks cruelty in charm, who wraps insults in silk, who makes you question whether the pain you feel is even real. Maybe you've had your own Ethan, someone who once protected you, but grew into a person who only protected his own image. And maybe, just maybe, you've had moments when you wished someone would stand up for you, speak truth into a room that has forgotten yours. But here is the truth. No one told me until I lived it. You don't need a billionaire to walk through the door and validate your existence. You don't need applause to confirm your value. You don't even need everyone to understand you. What you need, what you deserve, is the courage to stand with yourself when no one else does. Because the moment you do, the world begins to shift. People who once dismissed you will suddenly reconsider. People who once underestimated you will begin to hesitate. People who once relied on your silence will finally hear your voice. And most importantly, you will start to see yourself not as something to endure, but as someone to honor. If my story resonates with you, let it be a reminder: your compassion is not a weakness. Your work, whether it's paid well or not, is not small. Your heart, your integrity, your ability to hold others in their hardest moments is a kind of wealth the world desperately needs but rarely acknowledges. Never apologize for the kind of person you are. Never shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Never silence your truth to preserve someone else's image. And never forget that worth is not defined by money status or the approval of a room full of strangers. Worth is defined by how you walk through the world, how you show up, how you choose kindness without letting people mistake it for submission. So now I want to hear from you. Has anyone ever treated you as less than until the truth finally came out? Have you ever had to reclaim your dignity in a room that expected you to stay quiet? Share your story in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to find their own. And if you believe dignity matters more than appearances, if you've ever had to stand up after someone tried to push you down, then like this video, subscribe, and join this community of people who know that the quietest strength is often the most powerful. Wherever you are, whoever you are, your worth is not up for debate.